Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. And at the time of this recording, this is the end of September, which means that we're well into fall. And if you are in the Northern Hemisphere, this is probably one of the most exciting time of the year if you're an astronomer or an astrophotographer, because we're now over the hump of those short summer nights. And from here on out, each and every night will be longer and colder, which is awesome for astrophotography. And I think this is a good time to discuss one of the best beginners gadget to use if you are just starting out in astrophotography or you're thinking about getting into it. And that is to start with a common DSLR, preferably used, and preferably find it somewhere on the used market for an extremely low price. And it's also kind of strange that I'm going to be featuring my Canon 60D most likely for the very last time on this channel, because it is nearing the end of its useful life, at least in my opinion. I'll go more in details on that. But yeah, I just want to use this video to talk about why I think a common, used, old, inexpensive DSLR is one of the best ways to get into the hobby. I'm a little sad that this is probably the last time I'm going to use this camera though. Okay, so before I go outside, I actually want to spend some time to talk about what should you look for if you are in the market for a DSLR to start your imaging hobby. Well, I'm going to say this. The number one thing when it comes to looking for a DSLR or a mirrorless camera is check and see if you already have one in your household, because chances are you probably already have a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. And if you do, just use that one and start the hobby. However, if you don't have one, then there are a couple of things that I would recommend. Number one, you see that I'm holding a Canon here. This is the Canon 60D. And I would actually recommend that you go out and look for a Canon DSLR. Not because I think it's better, but because I think it's more convenient to do astrophotography with, because there are more accessories within the astronomy field that will connect to a Canon camera. And these are also more commonly found on the used market. I'm not sure why that is. Perhaps Nikon, Sony, Olympus, Pentax, Panasonic, those users, they tend to hold on to the cameras more. And most importantly, the third main reason why I would strongly recommend looking into a Canon is because if you buy an older Canon, this is the Canon 60D, a camera from this generation can be easily astro modified, either by yourself or ship it off to a professional to do it for you. And the reason why you want to astro modify your camera is that you are going to be able to pick up a lot more hydrogen alpha signal if your DSLR or your mirrorless is astro modified. And so those are the main reasons why I would recommend a Canon above all the other brands. Of course, you can use other brands as well. Nikon is probably the second most popular when it comes to DSLR for astrophotography. And I will even go on to say that Nikon sensors, from what I've seen, are probably superior to that of Canons, especially when you're comparing across the same generation. Of course, as you know, that Nikon cameras, they use Sony sensors, which are the main supplier for virtually all dedicated astro camera. So I think there's a correlation as to why Nikon sensors are superior to Canons. But I will say that from what I've observed, Astro modified Nikons are a lot more expensive than a Astro modified Canon. Same for Sony's. And I think it's because, number one, I don't think you can Astro modify a Nikon or a Sony on your own. Number two, they're just, I guess they're more complex, and it takes more money to Astro modify a Nikon or a Sony. But okay, so those are my brand preferences when it comes to looking for a DSLR. Aside from that, I would say to get the cheapest DSLR that you can find. The only criteria that I would strongly recommend is to get a DSLR body with a flip screen. This way, you're not looking, if your screen is fixed, let's just say that this Canon 60D has a fixed screen, I'm gonna be looking up like this the whole time, and I guarantee you that's gonna get old really fast. So aside from my brand preferences and why I recommend a Canon over Nikon or Sony, just make sure that whatever camera you get is cheap and has a flip screen. And to give you an example, this Canon 60D, I purchased it used back in 2020 when I was getting into the hobby, and it was, I think I paid $150 US for a used, and I paid another $100 to buy the glass that I need to use to Astro modify my own Canon 60D. So this whole thing right here, this is a Astro modified Canon 60D, and it only cost me, I guess, $250. So that's a great price point to get into the hobby. Before I set up for the night, I actually want to quickly talk about why I said at the beginning of this video that my Canon 60D is nearing the end of its useful life. Remember I said I purchased this camera used? Well, this is probably going to be the case for a lot of people. I purchased this camera without knowledge of its prior life. I know that just from this visual inspection that this camera was well taken care of when I picked it up, and it performed just fine. But what I never considered was how much more wear and tear you're going to subject a DSLR once you start astrophotography. Just think about it this way. When I take my calibration frames, my flats, my bias, my darks, I usually do 40 frames per each of the calibration frames. So just from a calibration standpoint, each of my project has at least 120 frames. And now on top of that, add that to however many hours that I am exposing throughout the night. So what I'm trying to say is that when you are doing astrophotography for with a DSLR, you are going to subject it to a lot more wear compared to what this was normally designed for, which is this typical daytime photography. As a matter of fact, photographers can comment and let me know, but I don't think most photographers take upwards of 100 shots per day. So I don't know. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the camera has degraded to the point where I am now seeing a lot more noise and a lot more visible banding, much more than I'm willing to accept. Don't get me wrong, this camera will still work, it will still fire, it will still take pictures. But I just cannot, if I were to compare, the pictures from early 2020 till now, I don't think I can accept this level of noise anymore. And I also don't think that I can use this camera to take anywhere near the 5 minutes exposure that is often required for emission nebulae. I think I can still use this camera for broadband targets because those objects require a lot less exposure time. We're talking about like 2 minutes, 3 minutes max. And just from a quick check, I can tell that if I were to take 3 minutes exposure at ISO 800, I'm not seeing much of a noise. But as soon as I go into the ISO 1600, ISO 3200, and get near the 5 minute exposure time, I am seeing more noise that I am willing to accept. So yeah, so just on a nightly basis, when you're doing astrophotography, you are going to subject your camera to a lot more wear. Not to mention that you're going to leave this thing outside. Who knows what that's doing to electronics? But that's why I said in the beginning that if you're in the market for a DSLR, get it used, get it cheap, because chances are you're going to subject that camera to a lot of wear and tear. And I also want to mention that the winter of 2020, when I first started the hobby, that was a great year for astrophotography because honestly, I don't think we had that much rain or cloud. I think on a weekly basis, I must have imaged at least 3 nights out of the weeks for the entire winter season. So I think that's another reason why, within the time span of roughly 2 years, my Canon 6D has degraded very fast. Not to mention that, who knows how many, I never checked the shutter clicks. Maybe I should have when I purchased it, but I didn't. Yeah. But I have to say that I am extremely glad that I had this with me starting the hobby, because if it weren't for this camera, this entire hobby would be impossible. So I am sad that this is probably the last time I'm going to be featuring this on the channel, though. But thank you, Canon. You're awesome. So, depending on the kind of person you are, you may or may not agree with this, but I personally think that when you're trying to learn something new, whether it's a hobby or a skill, you start with the most basics of equipment. And for astrophotography, DSLR or mirrorless camera, it's probably as basic as it gets when it comes to camera sensor. And I say that because it doesn't have cooling and it doesn't have a body that's essentially built for taking long exposure for astrophotography. Your images from a DSLR or a mirrorless camera will always be noisier than those captured by a dedicated Astro camera. But that's okay, because there are ways to combat that. Now, shot for shot, that's just a fact. Images coming out of a DSLR or a mirrorless camera will always be noisier than a dedicated Astro camera. There's just no way around it. But in your own user experience, there are ways for you to make your images sharper, more detail, and overall have less noise. And one of the easiest way, probably the most time consuming way, is to, just take more pictures, stack more pictures, have a longer integration time. The more integration time you have in your final image, the less noise you're gonna have and the more signal that you will end up with. So that's what I'm doing tonight. I've already have a night of Andromeda stored in my computer. So I will be adding tonight's sessions into that stack of data, and then I will stack all of them together, and hopefully, what is probably my final picture of what the Canon 60D of Andromeda Galaxy will be pretty decent. And another way to combat noise is, well, go to a dark site. You're gonna have less light pollution. That also helps a bit with the noise. But you know, like I said, shot for shot, your DSLR is gonna pump up more noise. But I think that, you know, that makes you overall a better astrophotographer. Maybe not immediately, but in the long run, because you're gonna learn how to process your image better. Well, you're pretty much gonna be forced to process your image better. And you're gonna learn, you know, what is that fine line where, you know, oh, I can't process this anymore. And if I process this image any longer, then I'm only gonna introduce more noise in the form of post-editing. So I really do think that when you're starting out a hobby, you know, again, you may or may not agree with this, use the most basic equipment that you can get your hands on, because number one, it'll probably be cheaper. Number two, it'll probably be easier to use. This is definitely the case for DSLR or mirrorless. It is definitely a lot easier to use than a dedicated Astro camera. And number three, because you're essentially working with less, in the long run, it's gonna pay off. It's gonna make you a better hobbyist in whatever hobby that you're trying to do. In this case, I firmly believe that if you start out with a DSLR or mirrorless camera, in the long run, it will make you a better astrophotographer. So now I just gotta wait for Andromeda to clear some of my building obstructions, and that should get going. It's about 8 p.m. right now, so I think I should be good within the next half an hour. So I'm gonna get going, so. Okay, so it's about 8:30 p.m. right now, and Andromeda just cleared the condo building that I live in, so I am ready to go. And it is a clear, calm, quiet night. Honestly, I cannot ask for a better condition for the final image of, or well, not of, but the final image coming from my Canon 60D. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also a little bit sad because, well, I mean, this was the camera that started it all for me. If it wasn't for how inexpensive and how widely available this Canon 60D was, and how easy it was for me to astro modify it, I might not be doing this hobby. So, you know, it's everything that I know, everything that I'm doing right now, everything that I'm showing you guys, that's stuff that I learned while using the Canon 60D. So I'm really thankful that it lasted as long as it did. Maybe I did use it too much, because like I was saying, the 2020 winter season was amazing. I honestly, I really think I imaged every single night. So it's only right that I invest as much time as I can into this final image. So if I were to start right now, I think I'm gonna have anywhere from 6 to 7 hours of imaging until either Andromeda hits the other side of my rooftop and daylight comes. And to add that to the previous batch of data that I have from another night, both for clear nights, clear nights with no moon. So it's gonna be as good of an image as I can, imaging from San Francisco backyard, Bordeaux 9 or whatever it is that I have right now. So I think at the end of it all, I should have, hopefully, crossing my fingers here, I should have at least 10 hours of data for the Andromeda Galaxy using the redcat 71 and my Canon 60D. Also I'm using the optolong L Pro filter. I don't think I mentioned it, but now you know. So I'm gonna get going. The final image from my Canon 60D, the camera that started it all for me. I hope you enjoy it, and I wish you all good health, clear skies, and if you're a beginner, this is a great time to start looking at your very first camera, and I really recommend you go with just a simple used old DSLR just to get you started, because once you know what you're doing, then you can carve out your own upgrade path. And I guarantee you, starting with a DSLR, I personally believe will make you a better astrophotographer in the long run. Okay, no more babbling. I'm gonna get going now. So take care, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Enjoy the final image of the Canon 60D DSLR. See you guys.